The first time I saw her in court, I almost laughed out loud. There she was, Karen, striding into the room like she owned the world. Her sharp blonde bob swung with every step, the red power suit clinging like armor, crisp white shirt pressed to perfection. She exuded authority, a predator disguised as a homeowner. Cold eyes scanning, lips pressed into that rigid line of self-righteousness that I knew too well. This woman thought she could bend anyone to her will, and for a long time she did. She had sued me over HOA dues. Can you believe that? After years of keeping my head down, doing my own work, living under the radar, she suddenly found a reason to drag me through court. She didn't know the first thing about me, about my life, about my property. She just assumed that she could bully, intimidate, and extract what she wanted because, well, she thought she was untouchable. I remember the first time I realized the stakes were higher than I imagined. The court documents landed on my kitchen table like a thunderclap. I stared at the letter, fingers shaking, a mix of fury and disbelief coursing through me. She claimed I owed the HOA thousands in back dues. Thousands? For what? I barely used the services they boasted about. I barely wanted anything to do with that pompous little neighborhood clique. But Karen wasn't just anyone. She was the spearhead of their small-town dictatorship. I didn't react immediately, not because I was afraid, far from it, but because I needed to think. And thinking, for me, meant planning. She was stepping into a world she didn't understand, a world I had quietly built under her nose, and she had no idea just how wrong she was to pick a fight with me. The first subtle victory came when I dug out the old property maps from the county archives. Yellowed with age, corners torn, water stains fading the ink, these maps held a secret she would never see coming. She had always prided herself on being meticulous, precise, a stickler for rules and lines on paper. But lines on paper, as I had learned over decades of hard living and smarter observation, could be perspective. I traced the boundaries carefully, marking what was mine. My jaw clenched as I followed the lines, my eyes burning with something I hadn't felt in years, vindication. And then I saw it. The realization hit me with the force of a hammer to the chest. Her house, her pristine little fortress of entitlement, wasn't fully on her property. Oh no, a corner of it, a significant portion of her foundation encroached on land I leased, land I had full rights to. The shock was intoxicating. She had sued me, belittled me, threatened me, while standing on the very ground I controlled. The next step was patience. The law moves slowly, and I had learned to move faster in the shadows. I watched her routines, noted her arrogance, the way she flaunted her power at HOA meetings, the way she lectured neighbors, smirked at their nervous compliance. Every handshake, every word, every glare was cataloged in my mind. I needed no lawyers, no authorities. This was my game, and I was going to play it my way. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the neighborhood, I approached her land, quietly, deliberately. My boots sank slightly into the soil, the familiar scent of earth filling my senses. I felt the grit of years under my nails, the resilience built from a lifetime of being overlooked. This was my world, and she was trespassing without even knowing it. I smiled to myself, a cold, controlled smile. That night, I began small. Subtle shifts of boundaries, markers moved ever so slightly but legally defensible. I documented everything meticulously, just in case. It was a slow burn, a preparation, a prelude to the crescendo that would leave her reeling. I could almost hear the gears turning in her mind, the sharp calculations she would make, the confident assertions she would give to anyone who would listen. And yet, she was blind to reality. Weeks passed. I continued my quiet observation, learning her patterns. I saw her leave in the morning, heading off to some overpriced boutique job, heels clicking with authority. I watched her return, garage door closing with mechanical precision. I learned the rhythms of her household, the weaknesses in her routines, the cracks behind that polished exterior. And then, one morning, it happened. The first move of true revenge. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't alert the HOA. I simply walked onto my leased land at dawn, just as the first light brushed the rooftops. I positioned markers that demonstrated beyond question that her house encroached on land I leased. No confrontation, no threat, just facts. Cold, undeniable facts that would make any claim she made appear laughable in their absurdity. When she arrived and saw them, her face twisted into disbelief, anger, and panic. Her cold, commanding eyes darted, searching for someone to blame, someone to intimidate. But there was no one. No authority, no neighbor, no lawyer. Just me. Silent, patient, watching. I let her stew in the realization, the dawning horror that her empire of entitlement was built on someone else's foundation, literally. Her lawsuits, her threats, her calculated fury, it all crumbled under the weight of truth. And I didn't stop there. Every HOA notice, every claim, every attempt to assert power over me was met with subtle, undeniable reminders that the ground beneath her feet was in fact under my lease. And the beauty of it? She had no one to blame but herself for ignoring the reality of the land. By the time she finally understood, she was broken in a way that legal victories could never accomplish. Her authority was meaningless, her power evaporated, and I stood tall, not as a litigant, not as a plaintiff, but as the one who had quietly, meticulously claimed victory without a single word of confrontation. Blue blood style, under the radar, elegant in its cruelty. Karen didn't leave that morning. She stood there, fists clenched, the color draining from her face as she stared at the markers, at the evidence I had left like a silent hammer striking truth into her pride. I watched from the shadows, leaning against my fence, boots scuffed, jeans worn, hands calm. Every line of her rigid posture screamed fury, but there was nothing she could do. Her rage was useless, powerless. It was intoxicating to see it crack just slightly beneath the polished exterior she so carefully curated. That evening, she held an emergency HOA meeting, a desperate attempt to rally some semblance of support. She paced in front of the board, hands gesturing, voice sharp and commanding, but her eyes betrayed panic. She was used to controlling people, not facts. She tried to explain, to assert that I owed dues, that I was in violation, that the HOA had authority, but the truth was a quiet weapon, and I wielded it silently. I didn't need to attend. I didn't need to speak. I let her words hang in the air, empty and echoing. I let the others watch her flounder, seeing their confidence in her slip away. Her charisma, her carefully constructed dominance, all meaningless. And I smiled quietly, the kind of smile that doesn't need to be seen. Over the next few days, I escalated subtly. Not with aggression, not with threats, but with control. Every time she sent a notice, a letter, a demand, I responded in kind. Not with legalese, not with emotion, but with fact. Photographs, documented evidence, timestamps, measurements. I watched as she tried to argue, tried to assert, tried to demand compliance. Each attempt became more desperate, more frantic, more unhinged. The neighbors started noticing. Small things at first. Her mood shifts, the way she avoided eye contact during casual interactions, her absence from the gathering she once dominated. Rumors began to circulate. I made sure to let subtle hints reach them. She may have misjudged her property lines, just loud enough for the right ears to hear. The story grew organically, and with every retelling, her aura of power crumbled. One night, I saw her trying to sneak onto my leased land, thinking she could plant something, markers, signs, claims. She didn't see me. I waited, heart steady, watching the absurdity of her arrogance. She thought she could outsmart me, but I had lived on this land longer than she had existed in this town. I let her fumble, let her retreat, and later made sure the evidence of her intrusion was quietly documented, another layer to the inevitable truth. Weeks turned into months. Every interaction, every HOA meeting, every casual conversation in the neighborhood became another opportunity for me to reinforce control. I didn't confront her directly. I didn't need to. I was a shadow, a presence she couldn't measure, a force she couldn't counter. And with each passing day, her frustration grew, twisting into paranoia. She started questioning everyone, doubting neighbors, distrusting even her most loyal supporters. Her empire of influence, built on intimidation and fear, was collapsing under its own weight. And I was patient. I knew the final move had to be perfect. It had to be undeniable. The moment came on a crisp autumn morning. I had arranged everything meticulously, timing each action to perfection. A simple shift in boundary markers, photographs ready, documentation undeniable. I sent an anonymous tip to the HOA, accompanied by copies of the evidence showing the encroachment. But I didn't reveal myself yet. I let the storm brew. Karen, of course, panicked. The HOA demanded an explanation. She tried to rally, tried to threaten, tried to control, but now the evidence was irrefutable. Every claim she had made against me evaporated under the harsh light of truth. She was forced to admit in writing that she had been encroaching on land I leased. Every threat she had used against me was exposed as absurd. Her credibility, her reputation, everything she had built around herself as a pillar of authority was gone. And I still didn't reveal myself. I watched quietly, savoring the moment. This wasn't about the law anymore. This was about control, about pride. She stumbled backward, clutching the hedge for support. I turned and walked away, slow, steady, unshakable. I didn't need to watch her crumble. Her own knowledge did that. The storm was over, and I had won. Quietly, elegantly, personally. Every ounce of her aggression, every lawsuit, every attempt to dominate me, neutralized without a single law enforcement officer, without a single courtroom battle fought by a lawyer. The neighborhood slowly returned to normal, the whispers fading, the tension dissolving. And I remained, quiet, resilient, unassuming, a figure who had endured, observed, and ultimately reclaimed what was mine. Karen? She moved, sold her house quietly, avoiding eye contact with anyone who might know the truth. The HOA tried to regain control, but by then the damage was done. The story of her hubris had already spread, leaving her legacy of intimidation in ruins. I didn't celebrate, not loudly, not with fanfare. My satisfaction was quiet, personal, complete. Blue blood revenge. Patient, methodical, undeniable. She had underestimated me, overlooked the grit beneath the worn jacket and faded jeans, and in doing so, she had placed herself on the very land she thought she could control without consequence. And that's the lesson I left behind. Never underestimate the quiet ones, the overlooked, the ones who live by grit, persistence, and patience. They see what you don't. They wait. And when the time comes, they don't just fight back. They reclaim everything you thought was untouchable. There's a moment right before someone loses everything, where they don't scream, don't cry, don't fight. They just go quiet. That was the phase Karen entered after I spoke those 4 words to her by the hedge. Your house is on my land. From that day forward, she stopped pretending. The red power suit disappeared. The crisp white shirts stayed pressed, but the confidence behind them evaporated. She still walked stiffly, still held her chin high, but her eyes had changed. They weren't commanding anymore. They were searching, calculating, afraid. And fear makes people sloppy. I could feel it in the air every time she passed my property line. I could see it in the way she slowed her car when she drove by, checking for changes, scanning for new markers, new flags, new truths she wasn't ready to face. She started waking up earlier, started pacing her driveway at night, started snapping at contractors, neighbors, even her own reflection. She tried intimidation once more. Old habits die hard. One afternoon, she marched over uninvited, heels stabbing into the gravel like punctuation marks in a sentence she thought she still controlled. She stood at my fence, arms crossed, posture rigid, voice sharp. She told me she'd make this very difficult. She told me I was confused. She told me I was out of my depth. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. I just handed her a folder. Inside were copies, lease documents, survey overlays, time-stamped photographs from different seasons, different angles, different years. Not opinions, not threats, reality. Layered, undeniable, suffocating. Her hands trembled as she flipped through them, not dramatically, subtly. the way someone shakes when their internal narrative collapses all at once. "This doesn't mean anything," she said, but her voice cracked on the last word. I leaned in just enough for her to smell the earth on my jacket, the oil on my hands, the years I'd spent learning patience instead of dominance. "It means everything," I said quietly. And that was when she understood the difference between authority and ownership. The next weeks were slow unraveling. I didn't rush it. I didn't push. I let gravity do its work. Karen tried to regain control by tightening her grip on the HOA, but power loses its edge when people sense blood in the water. Board members stopped backing her automatically. Neighbors stopped nodding in agreement. Questions started forming. Doubts whispered themselves into meetings she no longer dominated. I never showed up. My absence did more damage than my presence ever could. She sent letters, softer ones, then harsher ones, then none at all. She tried to act like the issue didn't exist, but land doesn't disappear because someone refuses to acknowledge it. Every morning she woke up on my lease. Every night she went to sleep knowing it. That knowledge eats at a person. I made my final move without fanfare. No confrontation, no warning. I exercised my rights quietly, precisely, and legally without calling a single authority. I altered access permissions, adjusted usage allowances, changed nothing suddenly, nothing dramatically, just enough to remind her that comfort is a privilege, not a guarantee. The first time a contractor hesitated at her driveway because of a boundary clarification, she exploded. The second time, she begged. The third time, she cried. That was when I knew it was over. Karen had built her identity on control, on being untouchable, on believing that rules existed for others, not for her. And now she was living inside a truth she couldn't bully, sue, or posture her way out of. She tried to sell the house quietly. No sign, no announcement, just whispered conversations and late-night calls. But buyers ask questions. Inspectors measure things. Truth doesn't stay buried when money is involved. The deal fell through. Then another, then another. Each time, a little more of her collapsed. The woman who once strutted through HOA meetings now avoided eye contact at the mailbox. The voice that once commanded silence now shook when she spoke. The posture that once screamed dominance now folded inward, defensive, brittle. One evening, months later, she knocked on my door. No heels, no suit, just exhaustion wrapped in denial. "I'll drop the lawsuit," she said. "I'll waive everything, dues, penalties, all of it." I studied her for a long moment, not with anger, not with triumph, with clarity. "You already lost," I replied. She stared at me, eyes glassy, searching for mercy, for leverage, for something she could still control. "There's nothing left to negotiate," I continued. "That ended the day you tried to own something that was never yours." She nodded slowly, like someone hearing a verdict they'd known was coming but hoped to avoid. Then she turned and walked away, shoulders slumped, power gone, illusion shattered. She moved out 2 weeks later. No goodbye, no announcement. Just an empty house sitting quietly on borrowed ground. The HOA never recovered. Without her fear-based leadership, people started thinking for themselves. Dues dropped, rules softened, control loosened. The neighborhood breathed again. As for me, I went back to my routines. Early mornings, honest work, quiet evenings. No celebration, no speeches, no victory laps. Because real revenge doesn't look like fireworks. It looks like patience. It looks like silence. It looks like letting someone destroy themselves using the very arrogance they thought made them powerful. Karen thought she was suing a nobody, a blue-collar man in faded jeans and work boots, someone she could step on without consequence. What she didn't understand is that some men don't fight loudly. They don't posture. They don't threaten. They wait. They watch. They build foundations stronger than ego. And when the moment comes, they don't take everything. They take exactly what was always theirs. So if you're still watching this, remember this. Power borrowed from intimidation always expires. Control without humility always collapses. And the quiet ones you overlook, the ones you assume are beneath you, are often the ones standing on ground you don't actually own. Because sometimes the most devastating revenge isn't done with fists or courts or sirens. Sometimes it's done with patience, truth, and the slow, inescapable weight of reality settling under someone's feet.